All right, why don't you call us to order?
Very well. I call this meeting to order on the July 9th Newberg City Planning Commission. Can we get a roll call, please?
Yes, okay. Jason Dale,
Here.
our new planning commissioner, Robert Sherry.
Here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Robert Ficker,
Excused.
excused. Jenna Moritz,
Here.
Chris Wright.
Excused.
Sharon Capri,
Here.
Jeffrey Musall,
Here.
Colin Bullitt.
Here.
Okay, thank you.
Very well. And I believe it's Rick's turn.
Sure.
Mayor Rogers.
Good evening, everyone. First off, before we even call this meeting to order of the City Council, I wanted to thank all of you planning commissioners for all of your yeoman's work and what you all do to keep us organized, zoned, and planned. So thank you. Thank you so much. Otherwise, let's call this City Council meeting to order as well, and a roll call, please, Sue.
Councilor Piros. Jean?
I see Jean.
Yeah, I see Jean. Okay. Councilor Martinez Plancarte.
Present.
Mayor Rogers.
Present.
Councilor Bacon.
Here.
Councilor Finley.
Here.
And Councilor Piros again. Okay, well, I can see that he's on, and I don't see Elise, so. Okay, that's it for
All right.
council.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we will move on to open the floor for any public comments that are not on the agenda for today. Do we have anybody who fits that description on this meeting? Hearing none, we'll move on to the consent calendar from the month of June 2020. Do I have any motions before us regarding that?
For planning commissioners, this is your minutes from last month's meeting.
Yeah. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from last month?
Planning Commissioner Jeffrey Musall, I move that we approve the minutes from the last meeting, the June meeting.
Very well. Thank you. I have a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Capri. I have a motion and a second. And let's get a roll call vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Hearing none, motion passes. The minutes from the month of June Planning Commission meeting are approved. Moving on, we have a workshop for the Riverfront Master Plan implementation steps. And we have the Newberg City Council here to help us with that and to listen to it along with us. So we'll turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Doug Rux, Community Development Director. We have with us tonight Frank Angelo and Kara Haggard from Angelo Planning Group. They are working with us under a contract with AKS Engineering and Forestry. So some of you may remember that Angelo Planning Group led us through creation of the Riverfront Master Plan that was adopted or accepted back in September of 2019. So we've engaged them. Kara's been doing a lot of writing and researching and wordsmithing over the last few months. And so what I'm going to do now is turn it over to both of them. They've got a PowerPoint presentation and we'll walk through the proposed changes to the comp plan and the development code. Frank, Carol?
Great. Okay, that's my cue. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us at your workshop tonight. We're very glad to be able to present the implementation steps for the Newberg River Master Plan. As Doug said, we were the project team. We led the project team that developed the plan back in 2019. We were also joined on that project with Walker Macy, who did a lot of the streetscape and the urban design aspects. DKS Associates, who conducted the traffic analysis, Leland and Associates, Leland Consulting Group, who conducted the economic analysis, and Wallace Engineering, who helped us with the engineering aspects of the plan itself. The Riverfront Master Plan began in early spring of 2018 and was concluded in September of 2019, as Doug said, when the City Council accepted the Riverfront Master Plan. Can we go to the next slide? Who actually is control? Am I controlling or?
No,
Oh,
Sue.
okay.
Sue's controlling.
Yes, okay. Yeah, so the City Council accepted the 2019 Riverfront Master Plan. This is the preferred alternative that was accepted by the City Council at that time. The planning process that led up to the acceptance of the Riverfront Master Plan was guided by private development and provides guidance for private development and public investment in order to establish a desired mix of residential and employment uses, to protect open space areas and other unique features of the riverfront, as well as take advantage of the area's location along the Willamette River, and finally plan for and implement a multimodal transportation network to provide internal access to the Riverfront Master Plan area, as well as connections to the city of Newberg. And those connections would be vehicle, bicycle, and pedestrian connections. The process itself was guided by extensive community involvement through in-person and online input, and included extensive public involvement opportunities with the general public and property owners in the area. The key foundational design elements of the chosen preferred alternative include identifying connections to the river, and that includes the trail network, identifying where gateways to the riverfront area, master plan area would occur, identifying streetscape improvements that would be constructed over time, as well as the street network that would be constructed to support the development of the Riverfront Master Plan area. Next slide, please. The plan itself that was accepted in 2019 included an action plan that had a number of elements. Tonight, we're going to be talking about changes to the city's comprehensive plan, the development code, implementing ordinances, as well as amendments to the zoning map and the comprehensive plan map. The action plan included in the Riverfront Master Plan also identified future infrastructure improvements, development community projects that are important to create the climate of investment within the area. It identified actions to be taken and partnerships to be formed to advance development in the riverfront area. Initially identified sources of funding for key improvements within the area, and then included a schedule and a time frame for initiating the key actions and projects. As I said, tonight is discussion and workshop is our opportunity to present the recommended amendments to the comprehensive plan policies, the development code, including development standards, and amending the comprehensive plan map and the zoning map. So we've been, as Doug noted, we've been working with Doug and we've identified a series of amendments to each of these documents. Kara, as Doug noted, has been working on this project for a couple of years now. So I'm going to turn it over to Kara so she can go through the recommended amendments to the comp plan and the zoning code, as well as the maps. After she does that, we will discuss next steps and be available for questions. And again, this is a work session. There's no request to adopt anything. It's more information for both the City Council and the Planning Commission. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kira.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, okay.
Seems good.
Okay, thank you. So generally, our amendments to the comp plan are updates to existing policies that are related to the riverfront to ensure that they're consistent with the updated master plan. So a lot of these are just kind of, as Doug mentioned, wordsmithing and just making sure that we're consistent with any updates to the vision. And I'd be happy to go over any of these in more detail, but for now, I'm just gonna kind of hit the highlights, which are these items in bold here. So for number 3, one of our key updates to the Riverfront Master Plan was the addition of a large amount of medium and high density residential land that was added to the Riverfront District. So this update just amends the existing policy to be consistent with that. And we've also updated some policies related to urban design. That's item number 5, to reflect our recommendations from the master plan. And these are mostly things like encouraging wayfinding, streetscape features, gateway treatments like signage and public art, and building design, which we can talk more about in the code amendments section. And in number 7 here, we've added a new policy related to the impact of traffic on the local system. And this one is based on the findings of the TPR analysis that DKS conducted as part of the master plan process. And that just evaluated the impacts of residential and office uses in the mixed employment designation. And so this is just kind of to add some policy language to make sure we're consistent with that finding. Next slide, please. And the final one I want to touch on for the comp plan amendments is our update to the industrial areas plan classification. The 2019 master plan has mixed employment uses in the western portion of the mill site, which you might have seen on that preferred alternative map. And then it has the kind of light industrial and industrial park uses more on the eastern side. So this is an amendment to the existing policy language, the existing statement for industrial uses, just to be consistent with that. And next slide, please. Hopefully you can all see this map okay, but the areas where we're proposing changes are the areas that are outlined in dark, thick black lines here. Some of these changes are just minor refinements, adjusting the GIS, stuff like that, excuse me. But the key ones that I want to point out are the changes to the mill site, which, as I mentioned before, you can see the western portion we've changed to this mix designation here. And then the other big change is to the Baker Rock property, which is kind of in the center of the riverfront area here. And it used to be almost entirely commercial. We have changed the southern portion of that property to parks to kind of create a consistent stretch of open space along the riverfront. And then the area to the north of that, surrounding the bypass there, is a combination of medium and high density residential land. And the biggest change, of course, is the expansion of the riverfront district itself, which was expanded north up to 9th Street and east to include the riverfront mill site. So I'm going to pause here. Are there any questions about the comp plan amendments before we dive into code?
You know, actually, Kira, I had one question. On Baker Rock, is Baker Rock okay with it being changed to park designation?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that
Okay.
was, yep. They were super involved in the planning process. And
okay. And then just one other question, and I think you'll probably get to it, but mixed employment, what does that mean? Is this a new district entirely?
Yes, we are going to talk about that in just a moment, but it is a new designation, and it's actually, it'd be a previous land use designation for the comp plan, which is mix.
Okay.
So that's already something that exists, but we'll be using that to implement this new zone, which is mixed employment.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
I think, Karen, this is Doug. So one thing for the council is to keep in mind is the city owns 2 parcels of land down by Rogers Landing. And one of those parcels has a comp plan designation of commercial. And this master plan identifies that being changed to park. It's the location where the old wastewater treatment plant was located. And I will be bringing forward to you at a future council meeting a resolution about the intent of changing it from commercial to park and annexing that property as part of the implementation of the riverfront plan. That's it.
All right, well, we can do more questions later if folks think of stuff, but I think for now, let's move on to the next slide. So we've come up with a list of 8 specific development code amendments here, but again, I'm just going to kind of touch on the highlights. We made some amendments to the existing riverfront overlay subdistrict, which mostly include changes to design standards for residential. We removed some of the multifamily design standards to reduce barriers to multifamily housing. And then commercial design standards, made a couple of modifications to those. And of course, we added design standards for the new mixed employment district as it is in riverfront overlay. But the main change, which Rick was asking about, is that we added a new mixed employment zone, which is intended to provide for a mix of employment uses that can include light industrial, office, commercial development. So it's intended to be really flexible, but to support employment in the riverfront district. And of course, we've added a new column to the use table as well to help implement that. So I guess we can move on to the next slide, which is just the zone map. But I don't have a lot more to say about this. It's really similar to the previous map, because this is just showing what the zones would be once these properties annex into the city. So are there any questions about the development code changes?
I have some questions.
Mm-hmm.
On the floor area limitation, we have the 60,000 square feet for commercial and office, and then the retail development part of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean with your wording where you say it shall not exceed 60,000 square feet or 25% of whichever is less?
So that's based on the TPR analysis that I had mentioned earlier that DKS conducted, and they analyzed traffic impacts of the mixed employment zone. And during that analysis, they used a floor area ratio or an area ratio of 60,000 square feet for retail, 60,000 square feet for office, and then the other portion of it was kind of a light industrial flex for the purposes of their analysis. So we just wanted to put some code language in that would be consistent to that, so that we don't end up with development in the mixed employment area that has unintended impacts to traffic. Does that make sense? And the 25% is just so if you have the specific acreage of the mixed employment area that we have now, if you were to say expand that, then it would be 25% of whatever the total area is, if it was larger than 60,000. Hopefully that helps clear some things up.
I'm not quite understanding that. And I looked at the traffic study and did talk about the 25%. Mm-hmm. in terms of land area. It's 5 acres plus, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I just don't quite understand, the either or on the thing. So maybe that could be written a little better.
Well, Robert, this is Doug. So one way to think about it is the hope would be that we could get some multi-story buildings. So if there was a commercial development and they would put in an office, theoretically they could put in a 3-story office. But if somebody came in and said, oh, I just want to do a 1-story office, the 25% basically puts a collar around that 21.5 acres of mixed employment area. Let me back up. So the base intent when we put the plan together, based upon discussions with Department of Land Conservation and Development, is there's a real issues within the state of Oregon about converting industrial land to non-industrial uses. During our development of this, we were looking at having employment opportunities that would help support the primary industrial uses. And so that's where the concept of the mixed employment came up. We have a mixed zone already off of Portland Road, on the south side of Portland Road. And so then we carefully looked at that about what types of uses based upon the ITE manual Transportation Engineers Manual on trip generation. And from that, DKS came up with the 60,000 square foot cap on commercial and the 60,000 office, I should say, and the 60,000 square foot cap on retail. So from that, then we dove a little bit deeper about, well, what type of retail uses might be able to go here. Restaurants support the industrial employment. You could have a winery, you could have a brewery, you could have a hotel. You could have office space uses. You could have mixed use. You could have something with retail on the ground floor and office space above. The intent, though, is to have this light industrial as the primary base for that. By doing that, it keeps us in good standing with DLCD that we're not converting 21 acres of industrial land to purely just commercial uses. And the study that Leland did showed that this area is a destination retail location. So it's going to be a small group of types of retail activities that would go down here that would help support the park's open space and the housing that are there. So we put two collars around it. One, square footage, and another one is an area basis. And say we're going to put a limit on the amount of non-industrial use that can occur.
Okay. You mentioned the hotel. I didn't see anything in the traffic report that included a hotel.
It falls into the retail side of it, and it goes to the square footage. And we ran all of these preliminary information. DLCD was actively involved when we put together the master plan, and ODOT was involved as we put this together. But a hotel is a possibility, or a hotel could go over onto the red area, which is identified as commercial. Again, trying to provide some flexibility and not be so rigid in the land use pattern that market conditions might not respond.
And this is Frank, and I think for the traffic analysis, the DKS model did the traffic forecast based on a worst case condition. In retail, a hotel would probably generate fewer trips than straight out retail uses. So they probably assumed, and I don't know this for a fact, but my thought is that they probably use that retail component versus a hotel as the worst case scenario for their transportation planning rule analysis.
Yeah, I would think that's probably the case. But hotels, multi-story hotels, their square footage is around 112,000 to 120,000 square feet. So they eat up, a lot of room. And with these limitations of 60 and 60, I don't know how that fits in with, having a hotel.
Well, again, if from a developer standpoint, maybe the mixed use is not the right location for a hotel. We provided that opportunity. Maybe it's better to go over on the commercial property.
Yeah. Got it. Now on the square footage, building maximum square footage numbers that you have in here. In one place it says 15,000 square feet for the ground floor buildings, and in another it says 20. Is there? Am I missing something, or?
I believe that those are the two different sets of design standards for the commercial and then for mixed employment, and we upped it for mixed employment to accommodate some larger building types that might be better suited in a kind of mixed employment zone.
Yeah, that one's at 15.
Mm-hmm. The commercial design standards is at 15. Just doing a little search in the document here.
No, I think that's at 20.
The commercial was at 15 and the mixed employment was at 20.
Mm-hmm.
Under the old riverfront plan, Robert, is that there was a building footprint limitation of 7,500 square feet.
Right.
And when we look through that, it's like, that's not being responsive to market conditions. So we're proposing to raise the commercial up to the 15,000. Market will drive, could be smaller than that, but no larger than. And as Kira was mentioning, as we looked at the mixed employment, we started with, well, we'll mirror what's in the commercial, but then since the base underlying is industrial and thinking about Class A offices or Class B offices, you're typically looking at a 20,000 square foot floor plate for each floor.
Yep. Okay, got it.
Other questions? I know everybody read all of it.
What is the maximum height in the ME zone? I didn't see that anywhere.
It's regulated by the airport.
Oh, okay.
The conical surfaces as you get away from the airport runway determine structure height.
Okay.
If you look in our code, the only uses that have a structure height limitation is residential. Everything in our commercial and industrial is governed by the airport and the conical surfaces.
At that distance, I would guess 150 to 175 feet, something.
And there's strategically, there's why the mixed employment was over on the west side of the industrial area, because as you come into the airport, you got the RPZ, you got the approach zone, so it has all these height limitations, which we can address through industrial buildings. But if you start to get commercial buildings, if you move it over to the side a little bit, we're towards the edge of those conical surfaces, you can get a little more structure height.
Got it.
Doug, this is Frank. I think back to Robert's comment on the 60,000 versus the 25%. I think if it's not clear, I think we could probably add an example or something in there to get a little more clarity as to how to actually apply that in the code. I think when you get in a code, you get either or. Sometimes it gets confusing as to how you actually apply it. So if we could, we'll take a look at maybe providing a little more definition or examples of how this would apply.
Okay. Other questions, commissioners, counselors?
Commissioner Jeffrey Musall, just a quick question on the mixed employment zoning. Is that I'm interpreting that to be pretty broad, that it's pretty much open to any type of employment as long as it's within the building standards? Is that correct? Are there any types of things that would be precluded? Because I see that there's industrial standards and everything for it. So basically, is it just open to anything that provides employment in the building standards?
Commissioner, if you looked at your packet starting on page 38, and then you look at the ME category, which is in the center of the page and which is highlighted in yellow, every place that you see an X, that means that use is not allowed in the ME. Okay. If you see a P, a C, or an S, that means that the use is either permitted, it's a conditional use, or it's a special use. And so you can see there's lots of activities when we put together the master plan that we thought was not appropriate for what the community was telling us they wanted to create in the riverfront area.
So the then yellow X, that is the prohibited things. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like heavy manufacturing was one thing that we knew we wanted to make this kind of a lighter employment area. So we prohibited heavy manufacturing, race-related uses, self-storage, some types of medical marijuana facilities. I think there's a few other ones, but most of the light industrial and employment uses are permitted. But you're right, it is intended to be much more flexible.
Honestly, I had that graph too big on my screen, and it was yellow X's. My apologies.
This is Rick. Is there a question on parking for the ME? Are you giving any allowances for parking, or are we going pretty much with what is standard?
It's pretty similar to what's in commercial. We have some language in there about shared parking facilities, but nothing really too different than what was already in the commercial standards for the Riverfront District area.
Thank you.
I had a question again about another area in the use uses that are allowed and not allowed. Neighborhood convenience uses apparently are not allowed in the ME zone.
That is correct.
But when you look at your comp plan revisions under the mixed use one, amendment number 11, they're mentioned there.
Okay, we'll take a look at that.
I was wondering if that's a misprint or what it might be.
I think that's the mix, the general mix plan classification, which doesn't only implement the mixed employment, if I'm correct, Doug, it also implements your mixed neighborhood zone. Is that right?
Yes.
So I believe that's where the reference to commercial convenience retail comes from, because that's just applying to the base designation.
Yeah, think of it this way, Robert. I mentioned that there's a mix comp plan designation up off of Portland Road on the south side.
Right.
And there we have allowed historically convenience type uses. Here, what we're proposing under the mix comp plan designation is when you get to the mixed RD, the zoning piece of it, then again, we were selective on the types of uses that could go there. And again, it draws us back to the market study that was done by Leland about this location being a destination type of commercial activity. So you could have convenience store over in the commercial portion of it, but not in the mixed employment at this location.
Got it. As you know, I'm new to this, so.
That's okay.
Great questions, and you've done your homework, so I appreciate that.
Well, you know, I spent the last 25 years in retail development.
Oh.
So I know a little bit about it. and you know, things are all new to me here, so.
Any other questions?
Okay, let's move on then.
Sure. So next slide. Yes. So the next slide is the next steps that will be undertaken to implement the Riverfront Master Plan. Again, today is a work session. We want to provide the information to both the Planning Commission and the City Council to hear your comments on them. We've gotten some good comments we'll take back and make some edits. The Planning Commission for adoption is, the Planning Commission hearing is tentatively scheduled for October 8th to adopt the amendments that are before you today. And that, assuming that occurs on October 8th, the City Council public hearing would then be scheduled for November 2nd. So adoption would be of the regulatory nature aspects of the Riverfront Master Plan would be done by middle of November. There's also another effort going on to coordinate the annexations of properties into the city limits of Newberg. Much of this is not in the city yet, as Doug noted, some properties that are being discussed right now. There are some letters going out this week or next week to some property owners, informing them that the city is interested in working with them to consider annexation into the city of Newberg. So that is ongoing as well. Those properties will have to annex into the city if they want to develop to urban standards to obtain the urban infrastructure. And then we will continue, and the city will continue to prepare public information on the project website describing the annexation, the plan and zoning code amendments that are being considered by the city, and any other information relevant to the implementation of the Riverfront Master Plan. And then finally, the schedule, which next slide, please. This is this is actually an earlier schedule because we have moved out the Planning Commission and the City Council hearing. So this will need to be updated, but it shows generally the schedule of events for the zoning code and the comp plan amendments. Coordination property annexation, as I mentioned, has already started and will be ongoing through September and into the fall. Coordination with Yamhill County, there's been the initial steps of coordination have occurred. What was thought to be a fairly intensive effort to coordinate with Yamhill County has turned out to be, I believe, not so intensive. I think Yamhill County has assumed that this would all be in the city limits at some point, so they will be, there's not a whole lot of coordination that's required. And then public involvement will continue throughout until the adoption of the plan elements by the City Council. So that concludes our presentation and the work session. And again, we're open to any questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, I think, oh, somebody's got their hand up. Stephanie?
Yeah, I was just curious if you have any idea of about how many property owners you're going to need to talk to about annexation.
811.
Okay. All right.
And letters went out earlier this week, and I've already been having conversations with a number of property owners about annexation, which also includes ODOT and annexing the portions of the bypass that are currently not annexed into the city. So talked with Yamhill County, Baker Rock, ODOT, and West Rock so far.
And have those conversations been favorable?
Counselor, all conversations are mixed. So continuing to see where Yamhill County is at about annexing the landfill, which is identified to be a future park area. I've had some conversations with CPRD, who's been in conversations with Yamhill County about a land transaction for the landfill. So I got some new information today that I didn't have a couple of days ago. I've talked with Baker Rock. They are interested in annexing their property. ODOT has not expressed any objections about annexing the bypass, or at least that portions of the bypass that are outside the city at this point in time. And West Rock is in that position of trying to find a buyer, but city has made it very clear you can't get sewer and water service unless you are annexed into the city. So that one becomes a timing issue. The other properties that letters have gone out to, CPRD, some of the Ewing Young Park, there's some little areas that are not annexed. So I'll be talking more with them about that. There's some property down off of Waterfront Street. There are 3 different parcels. There's one off of Weatherly Way. There's one up off of Winooski Street. So they're not larger parcels, they're smaller ones. And so we've just, again, this week started to do that outreach to have those conversations about annexation.
Thank you.
Okay, any further comments or questions or anything from anybody?
I just want to say this is awesome. This is the highlight of my month.
It's been a long journey to get here, but we're moving forward. Remember, all of this is tied to our urban renewal program that we're evaluating. And so getting the comprehensive plan provisions in place is important. We're working on the functional plans, transportation, sewer, water, and storm that need to be in place, because we get to a point in the urban renewal program, we have to make a finding before the Planning Commission that the urban renewal plan is in conformance with the comprehensive plan. So all of these pieces need to be in place before we get to that trigger point in the urban renewal program.
Right.
Very good. We'll definitely acknowledge a lot of work and a lot of time and energy. So thank you.
I like your little drawing there too. Looks great. If that's what it ends up looking like, then we're in good shape.
That's the plan.
This is Stephanie. I have another question.
Go for it.
My question is, has there been any discussion, and can there be some discussion about running purple pipe to that park area along the river? Will that be an option?
It is an option. When we were working on the master plan, we were talking, Kira will remember this, I kept talking about an eco district down there with purple pipe and tapping methane out of the landfill and solar on all of the roofs and so forth. Something that, you know, if there was a disaster, it could kind of sit on its own and continue to operate. Didn't get a lot of traction with that. I haven't been able to get traction for 20 plus years on that idea. But with the wastewater plant that's already there, yes, it's feasible to bring a purple pipe across Winooski and bring it into the riverfront area. That purple pipe could be used for manufacturing process. Can't use it for food production, but some kind of processed water, chillers, coolers, doing irrigation for landscape areas and or park areas. So that opportunity is there, yes.
I would really, really like to see that be a priority.
Hey, Doug, just for one, not much traction with the echo stuff. I'm all for it. I'll be one in support of it. So
I'll be two in support.
Me too, absolutely.
Be all for it.
Too.
Well, I went from 0 to 4 or 5 in a matter of 30 seconds.
We're unanimous.
One thing
what happens when you don't ask the right people.
Right. Hey, but if I could ask you all just one favor, if from now on, every time you go to bed, could you cross your fingers and say, West Rock, please sell the property? We need someone to redevelop it. Could you all please do that?
I think Doug's been doing that for years.
I feel like a pretzel. No, we're continuing to work with West Rock. You know, we have things in the future to do with this, because remember the linear park underneath the half-mile-long bridge? That's a whole different level of conversations with ODOT to stay out of the 4F issues and not having parks and so forth. And we've had conversations with CPRD about that. That is not necessary for what we're doing now to do the implementation, but that'll be a strategy that will need to be addressed in the future. I think one of the other pieces is, and Kara brought this up, was the housing component of that. And so the housing is really over on the the west side of River Street, but we did put in that high density residential there off of 14th, kind of sandwiched between the commercial, but then in close proximity to the mixed employment and the industrial, and then stepping it down to the medium density as you go further to the west. So there are a variety of housing opportunities in the future. We strategically did not identify housing on the West Rock site east of the mill site because of the unknowns on environmental conditions.
This is Gene, also known as Councillor Pyros. I'm just wondering where along there is my nursing home going to be? I can look around.
I can't tell you specifically where that would be, Gene.
With a river view, of course.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Just think about it.
On the second floor with an elevator, correct?
Exactly.
You're on one of the boats, maybe.
Okay. My wife would love it.
Any other questions from commissioners, councilors? If not, Mr. Mayor, this would be the opportunity for you to adjourn the council meeting, and you can all go off and enjoy the rest of your evening.
All righty. Well, I will adjourn the meeting. I just, Kara and Frank and Doug, thank you so much. And thank you for letting us sort of jump in on this meeting. And again, to all of you planning commissioners, Jason and all of you, thank you, right? Thank you so much for all that you do. It makes the community better. So thank you so much. And good luck discussing the Mill District. I'm going to be interested to hear what you all come up with. So thank you, and have a good evening. All right. Keep your fingers crossed about West Rock selling that property. So please. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Frank, Kara, thank you very much. I'll be talking to you soon.
Okay,
Sounds
thank you,
good.
Doug.
Thanks,
Thank
Doug. Thank
Good night.
everybody.
Have a good meeting.
Okay, moving on to the next order of business, the Mill District Workshop. And I believe we have Doug for that.
Well, I'm actually going to turn it over to Keith. He's managing this
Keith,
project,
okay.
and he has all the material and the knowledge. I'm just the color commentator.
I don't know about the knowledge, but I'll do my best.
You're always selling yourself short, Keith. Come on.
Okay, so on to the next workshop. So this one is going to look at creating Mill District. This is kind of a workshop to gather some information as well as get you up to speed on what we're looking at. So next slide, please. Okay, so the area outlined in green is where the Mill District will be located. It's a mixture of C3, or the downtown commercial, and M2, which is an industrial district. We're looking at combining this into one M5 district. So next slide, please. And this is what we need to do from here. So there are comprehensive plan text amendments we'll be looking at, zoning map and code amendments, design guidelines. Those need some work. They're at the beginning of the kind of looking at them and figuring out where we're going to be going with those. And then transportation planning rule analysis. Also, I'd like to point out too, we sent out a letter in June to all the property owners within this district, provided them with basically the same information that you're looking at. And we sent out another one here at the beginning of the week. It was prepared last week, but mail didn't go out to let them know that we're having this work session. The work session was also mentioned in the letter in June too, but we haven't gotten any response. And I should also mention that we're working closely with Molly. She's executive director for the Newberg Downtown Coalition. So our names both went out on this letter, and we both provided our contact information to get a hold of us and start discussing this. So we'll continue to try and work with the property owners. Next slide. So a summary of the comprehensive plan amendments. So these are intended to encourage tourism-related business, possibly a hotel, craft industrial uses within the M5 zoning district, as well as downtown. This abuts the downtown and is in the downtown improvement plan. And then the M5 district, as far as the use categories or the comprehensive plan future land use categories, it would fit into the IND, the industrial, and the mixed use designations. Next slide, please. Okay, this is where we're going to get into the code amendments. These are in the definitions. We don't have a definition for craft industrial. What this would provide is a business owner coming in that wants to manufacture, process, fabricate, packaging, or assembly of goods, retail, eating or drinking, or similar commercial uses on site. And then incubator space. This is a really cool economic development tool. I've seen them in a single space where they have individual businesses come in, and they're offered a lot of services that, they may not have the capital to get a business going, but they have a great idea. They have a good business plan. So these tools are put in place to try to help somebody get their business off the ground and running. So really excited about that one. Next slide, please. And live work units. So this would allow for commercial or office on the first floor, and then be residential on the second. You could have something that even is connected at the rear of the property, depending on how the building's laid out, but it would allow somebody to both live and work. We don't have a definition of that in our code either. And then for the retail food and beverage and artisan production category, I believe artisan production category or artisan production is new. It's not underlined there. The underlying text is what we're suggesting to add. So what this would allow is artisan who does work with leather, glass, cutlery, paper, ceramics, textiles, yarns, and other similar products to operate under this land use category. Next slide, please. M5 district. So we have to have a purpose for this district, and I'm going to read through this one. The purpose of the M5 district, craft industrial district, is to create and preserve and enhance areas that provide a mixed commercial and light industrial uses, particularly small scale craft industrial uses with an integrated commercial component. The district is intended to complement nearby commercial areas for providing opportunities for production spaces, while minimizing offsite impacts. And as I mentioned earlier, the M5 district is equivalent to the I&D or the industrial and the MIX categories in our comprehensive plan. Next slide, please. Retail food, beverage, and artisan production. So we're modifying existing text here, and I have some dots to indicate what we're adding there. So for the characteristics, there's actually a couple of different parts, and you'll find these in a portion of our code. It's kind of a two-step process. When somebody calls us up and says, hey, I want to put in this type of use, we go to the zoning table and we try to find a term that satisfies what they're looking for. And then we go to this other section where it talks about specific examples, exclusions, and then the characteristics. So this is located in that section of our code. So this would, again, allow an artisan production of using cutlery, paper, ceramics, or producing cutlery, glass, leather, and other similar products. And then we give out examples as a coffee roaster, a tea manufacturer with a tasting room, art studio, furniture makers, metalwork manufacturers, with retail areas on site. So we do want to have a retail component, not just strictly industrial and manufacturing. That's important. And then the exclusions would be manufacturing uses with no retail sales and components classified as light industrial uses. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So the characteristics for the craft industrial category, this is, I believe, a new it's a new category. This would allow the manufacturing, processing, and fabrication, and packaging, and assembly of goods with an associated public commercial component on site. Outdoor storage, we want to, again, in larger industrial areas, you tend to see very large outdoor storage areas. Because of the nature of this district, what we're trying to do is say, yeah, in some cases, there's going to be a need for this outdoor storage depending on the use, but we want to have it limited. And then we want to have it screened. So we do have this 10% of the site. Accessory uses, retail sales, display, and consumptions of goods produced on site. And then again, occupying a minimum of 10% of the floor area. So this would be kind of the storefront. You have crafters that are working in the back of the building, and then they have the storefront in which they're able to show their goods, sell, and present them in the community. Next slide, please. And the examples, there'd be food and related products, breweries, distilleries, wineries, production of various goods, textiles, apparel, woodworking. We mentioned furniture, cabinet makers, kind of the crafty type stuff and production of artwork, of course, and toys. So the exclusions here would be uses distinct from light manufacturing. What we don't want to have is heavy industrial type uses in this because it is in our downtown area. And we want this to be just another kind of neat little area where we're able to draw people over there and they're able to see crafters and things like that. And it gives me goosebumps. Next slide, please. Lot requirements. So if you remember that zoning map that I showed earlier where it showed the M2. So the M2 district requires 20,000 square feet of lot area for those zoning designations. What we would like to do is reduce that down to 5,000 square feet. That puts it in line with the rest of the C3 district, and it makes it more doable in this kind of smaller area. Next slide. For interior yard setbacks, we'll add the M5 zoning district. Of course, there's no mention of that in this section of the code because there is no M5 yet. We will maintain a 0 interior yard setback to commercially or industrial zoned property. Where you have an abutting property that's zoned residential, then that setback would be increased to 10 feet to an interior yard setback. And just to clarify too, we have an interior yard setback here. Some communities will have a side yard and a rear yard. What we look at is entire side yards all the way back to the rear of the property, and that's what we call our interior yard setback. Next slide, please. Building height limitations. So as was mentioned earlier, we don't have really building height limitations in the commercial and industrial zones, but it is limited with the airport. And this area would be within the conical surface of the airport. Where you have a property that's abutting a residential zoned property line, this next point would require that anything closer than within 50 feet would be the same height as that residential district. So the residential zone property, like the R1, the height limitation is 30 feet. What we don't want to have is this daunting, huge building, you know, sucking up all the sunlight from a single family home that may abut this area. So this provides some relief to those property owners. Next slide, please. Live work units, building and site design standards. These are new. So this first one is similar to what we removed from the 2nd Street area where we had a commercial requirement for the first floor. Again, the 2nd Street is more looking at residential type of uses. The Newberg Downtown Improvements Plans really push for that sort of use along a concentration of residential use along 2nd Street. So this is a little bit different. It's in the commercial area. The minimum floor to height, the first floor would be 13 feet, and 13 feet generally for commercial buildings, and you have higher ceiling heights than you would with a typical residential. So we want to have these things designed for commercial or industrial type use. So, and then the off-street parking requirements. We would still maintain the requirement for residential parking spaces, but if you notice, there is the fee in lieu option that we have approved. So if a developer came to us and wanted to utilize the fee in lieu program, they could do so. They still have to figure out where they're going to park the cars, but there is the ability to do that. Next slide, please. And then units that exceed 2,000 square feet in gross floor area must have a separate entrance from a business and residential portion of the use. And then within each live work unit, the living area shall not exceed 1/2 of the total floor area, and that's because we want to still gear these types of uses toward commercial and residential, the artsy type of uses that we're hoping that will be generated in this district. Next slide, please. Landscaping and outdoor areas. So with the M5, we would add it to the 15% landscaping requirement that we require in commercial industrial zone properties. Also, currently our code requires that a parking loading area providing 10 or more parking spaces, each of those parking spaces have to have an equivalent of 25 square feet of landscaped area per parking space. And what we're suggesting for both the C3 and the M5 here is to reduce that down to 12.5. This is in our downtown area. It's not further out east of downtown where there's maybe a little bit more land area. So there's a little bit more constraints in this area for this sort of thing. And then for a parking loading area and drive aisle, which runs adjacent to a property line, we have a current requirement that there has to be a landscape strip of at least 10 feet of interior width, or the width of the required yard, whichever is greater. If it's some front yards are required 25-foot yard setback, that would be in the institutional. Residential is typically 15. And then what this would do is also within the C3 and M5, it would reduce that down to 5 feet instead of 10 feet. Again, we're trying to be less restrictive on these properties. And it may be eliminated along with any lot line that's adjacent to an alley. There's no reason to have a planter strip really next to an alley, given that that is not typically a use where you're going to have folks seeing what's going on there, and it's an alley. So next slide, please. Pedestrian space landscaping. This is an existing section in our code 15.420.020. It's in the landscaping section. Go. What this would provide is within the C3 and M5 district, the pedestrian spaces may also include outdoor cafe style seating and outdoor display or sales areas. And then for 6, we provide additional information on outdoor cafe style seating and outdoor display or sales areas, saying they may be provided along sidewalks in the C3 or M5, again, our downtown districts. And but what we want to make sure is that there is a clear path provided for that meets ADA requirements. I believe the ADA requirements requires a 5-foot width for folks to be able to walk by these uses. You'll notice in our downtown that we're picking up a few tables here and there. They have to meet that same ADA requirement. So we have provided some ability for our local businesses, given the COVID-19, to have some of this outdoor seating. So you're going to probably be seeing more of that popping up. We just approved another application today, in fact. Next slide, I mean. Signs. We would add the M5 zoning district to allow electronic message centers. That's in our code and is allowed in the commercial districts. Not in the C3 district. I don't believe we allow those. I'd have to look at the code, but I'm pretty sure we don't. We have different types of sign requirements down in the downtown area to keep that feel of the downtown. And then we also have a portable sign program that allows for various zone properties to have these portable signs. So just for reference, within the C2, we allow 1 sign per 100 feet of frontage. And if you think about the east side of town, cars are moving a little bit faster. That's where you find the C2 zone property, the bulk of the C2 zone property. Within the C3, that's downtown, you have slower moving traffic. What we're allowing there is 1 sign per 15 feet of frontage. In the institutional, we allow 1 sign per 100 feet of frontage. And what this does is kind of, this is in an area where you have little bit faster traffic, more traffic going along Main Street there. And this still allows these signs, but given the nature of that area, it was thought to be more appropriate to have these spaced at every 30 feet for, or require 30 feet of frontage for each one of these signs. Next slide, please. Off-street parking, bicycle parking, and private walkways. This would be amendment to 15.440.010. It would add the M5 zoning district, allow the fee in lieu for residential parking, and also allow up to a 50% reduction for required parking. So the one required parking besides residential requirement for parking is we have one parking space for each 500 square feet of gross floor area. Next slide, please. Special use standards. So this is getting into an existing category. Again, we're going to add the artisan good productions. Within our code, we have certain uses that require a conditional use and other uses that require special use. And this is one of those special uses here. It's existing text. We're suggesting that we remove a more restrictive requirement that requires 25% of the gross floor area to be a showroom, retail, or dining area. And we feel that the 10% gives more flexibility. If somebody wants to have a little bit more of a production area with smaller floor area for the showroom, then we think that is just fine. They could always go up and have a larger showroom. There's no restriction on that. And then the size limit, the maximum size, the production area would be limited to 10,000 square feet. And so that would, you know, if we're saying that we want the minimum lot size to be 5,000 square feet. So this would probably require like a two-story building. I don't know. Anyway, next slide, please. And then now I'd like to kind of switch gears. I know this is a lot of information, but if we could go to the attachment 4, you'll find on, looks like page 7, but I think it's further down. It's page 7 on the document that I pulled this for, but you'll see that the table of uses. I just want to go through the C3 and the M5 and what will maintain. The majority of these uses that we're going to have in the M5 are also in the C3, but there are some differences that you should be aware of. So, and there's also some additional suggestions about the C3. We're not sure if we're going to make all these amendments to the C3 yet. It's still something that we need to look at a little bit closer, but I'm going to present them. So currently within the downtown area, a single family detached home requires a conditional use. We're saying that no, let's change that to permitted use. I'm not going to go through the footnotes at this point, mostly because I believe we modified 5 and 8 recently in one of our amendments. So the language in this document is slightly different from what we've adopted recently. Next, let's go to page 8. I'm not going to cover all the C3 uses. I'm going to try to focus on the M5. So mixed use dwellings, we would be adding that as a permitted use. The dwelling, a caretaker dwelling, that would also be a permitted use if you don't have that in the C3. We would have home occupations, no more than one outside employee, paid employee, which that's our current allowance now. If you have a home occupation, we allow not only the person that lives in the home, but they can also have like one outside employee. What we don't want to do is have residential areas turn into commercial areas or office areas. So that's why there's that sort of restriction. But within the C3 and the M5, there is a category that would allow for more than one outside paid employee as well. And we would change these from conditional to special uses. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we talked about live work units. We currently don't have that within our zoning table. So we're going to be adding that, and they would be special uses. Under the institutional care and housing, we're going to mimic what's going on in the C3 with exception of larger residential care facilities. It's a blank there, so when you see blanks in these tables too, it means that it's not permitted. Sometimes there's X and other times there's blanks. Hospitals also we wouldn't want in the M5 district, but it is a permitted use within the C3. Religious institutions, we would, an assembly type uses, we would allow the same that goes on in the C3 for the M5. For schools, again, we're going to be modeling what goes on in the C3. So colleges and commercial educational services would be allowed as a permitted use. Parks and open spaces, same thing here. Probably wouldn't be able to fit a golf course within this area. So we're gonna say that that's not a use that would be appropriate for either the downtown or the M5. Community services, we would also make that a permitted use. And I'm going to go over the next page here. We're also following the same thing that's going on with C3 for emergency uses, dog pound, cemeteries. For transportation, we are going to mimic exactly what's going on with the C3 with the permitted and conditional uses. Utilities, same thing, we're going to be modeling what's going on with the C3 and the M5. And under commercial office uses, we would allow both of these medical offices and local business office as a permitted use with reference to the footnote. And then commercial sales and rentals, we would be modeling again the C3, and there is a difference here for the bulk outdoor. Mostly because we want to, given the nature of the M5 district being a little bit more industrial, we would want to allow for outdoor storage, but we have those other restraints on the size of these outdoor storage areas and then also the screening requirement. Over to page 10. So temporary emergence, we're saying within the M5, no. And I think the reasoning there is that, you know, this is kind of a district where we want to have artisans and crafters and folks that produce this sorts of things. So we want this district to kind of be something that draws people into that area. And we already allow the temporary emergence. If you think about the guy that sells hot dogs in the downtown area, that would be considered a temporary emergent. He moves around. Medical marijuana, we would say that within the M5 that would be prohibited dispensary, but it's a permitted use within the C3. Retail food, beverage, and artisan production. This would be a special use, and we did add some criteria for that that we discussed earlier. The eating and drinking establishments would have the same it would be a permitted use in both the C3 and the M5. The only difference under commercial services would be commercial vehicle services would be a permitted use. And I think the reasoning for this, sometimes you have these specialty car folks that make these really cool cars or motorcycles and stuff. And I think that those sorts of uses would probably fall in well with the M5 district as well. Let's see, down under commercial lodging, bed and breakfasts would not be allowed within this area. Hotel or motel, that would be a permitted use. And we're also talking about dropping a footnote there. And then under the industrial uses, the M5 is intended to be a little bit more industrial. So we are going to allow some of these uses as being permitted by right, and others would be a conditional use permit. industrial service and wholesale and industrial sales would be a conditional use. Some of the wholesale manufacturers, they can have very large footprints. And I think the idea here is they have a little bit smaller, more crafty type manufacturing and that sort of thing. So, and then the next page, we are going to be modeling most of the uses, except when you get down to medical marijuana processors. The suggestion was that that would be a permitted use. Recreational marijuana processors, that would also be a permitted use with a footnote attached to that. Recreational marijuana producer would be a conditional use. There would be no outdoor grow operations. And then the rest of the marijuana related uses would be the same as you would find being allowed within the C3. At this point, I'd like to go back to the slides. And please, I know that I'm covering a lot of information. Stop me if you do have any questions. There's a lot of information for everybody to hear tonight between the riverfront and this. So with the transportation planning rule, when we make changes like this, the table that we just went through, these uses will generate a certain number of trips. And this transportation planning rule has to be looked at. It's related to Goal 12 to promote development of safe, convenient, economic transportation systems. So they'll look at the changing of these uses and what the impact would be, and see and draft the report based on that. But it's a requirement of the state to do this, the work. And in this case, we will be hiring a consultant to do the TPR analysis. But all cities and counties have to go through this when they make changes like this. So next slide, please. Design guidelines. We have not done a lot of work on the design guidelines. There are some aspects where we talked about setbacks and things like that. The wording in the downtown improvement plan was that we would want to have guidelines. There is a difference between guidelines and standards. Standards are more black and white. You either meet it or you don't. Guidelines usually have a little bit more flexibility. What we would like to do is maintain that gritty industrial feel that's in that area now. So we may come back here at a later date and bring some additional draft guidelines to you, but at this point we don't have a lot. I've taken a look at some of the guidelines, and I don't think it's the sort of thing that all craft zoning districts or these sorts of districts are the same. I think we really want to take a Newberg approach and look at what we have over there. The other thing is we're hoping to bring the property owners and to get some of their feedback. We really want to make sure that there is buy-in. So we are reaching out to the property owners. But that concludes all my talking. What I'd like to do now is ask for some suggestions, any concerns, and we can go back and make changes as needed.
Okay, thank you, Keith. At this point, the floor is open for anybody that has anything they want to add or suggest or comment or anything.
This is Commissioner Capri. I just have one question. And that is there in any of the plans, is there any kind of a thought about creating a pedestrian zone where, you know, maybe the traffic is not allowed into between the buildings? I know there are lots of places I've been in the world that have no traffic at all in them. It's all pedestrian zone. I think that it'd be very cool to have a pedestrian zone with tables and all these restaurants and art places that people could wander without cars.
Yeah, At this point, I don't believe that we have anything in the downtown improvement plan, but what we do have is the idea of bumping out along First Street and Hancock, some of these areas to provide a wider area so that we might be able to have outdoor seating that extends beyond right up tight against the building, which is what we're looking at now. That's an expensive process, but it would be a wonderful addition, and it would provide a little bit of that. I am familiar with these pedestrian kind of mall areas. One of the first ones was in Kalamazoo, Michigan. In fact, and then I moved to Grand Junction, Colorado, and they modeled their downtown mall after that. The thing that Kalamazoo really failed at is that by not having it was a hit early on, but as time went on, the mall began to fail. And they had to open it up to one lane of traffic. In Grand Junction, Colorado, they actually kept it open, but they have a serpentine road that goes through there. So it does slow down the traffic, does make it more pedestrian friendly, but sometimes those type of uses are hard to keep going. But at this point, we don't have anything in there.
Commissioner, this is Doug. You have to keep in mind that Main Street is a state highway. Hancock Street is a state highway. And First Street is a state highway. And they're going to continue, and First and Hancock are freight routes. And so the state's going to drive that, and they're going to stay state highways. The portion of Grant Street north of Hancock and then Sheridan Street to the west of Main, my vision is that those right-of-ways would get vacated in the future. Grant Street between Hancock and First may or may not stay as a public street. Lincoln Street between Hancock and First is actually a private street. It's not a public street. So that could actually be redeveloped now. So we've got these different jurisdictional issues that come into play that would make it extremely difficult to create a pedestrian street because of the state highways.
Okay.
Still a good idea. One for limitations like that. Okay, any other questions?
I do have a question regarding the
Go ahead.
residential density of the M5 district or proposed M5 district. The reason I ask is because we brought up fees in lieu, and at least from my perspective, those are only feasible with densities similar to R3. And so what will the densities be like in the new M5 district for their admittedly limited residential purposes?
Yeah, I don't think we have a limitation on density.
Okay.
We do not.
Okay.
It's really driven by parking. And
Okay.
so when we added the tool into the toolkit, you could pay a fee in lieu of, then it becomes market conditions about a developer, how many spaces does he need to have for his residential tenants on site to be able to get the rents that he's looking for. But yeah, in our commercial, in our C3, we don't have any density, and in the M5, we're not proposing any minimum or maximum density.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
I have a couple.
Go ahead.
Keith, I understand what you're trying to do here. Is there anything like this that you're trying to create anywhere near here? So I can get a better sense of what you're doing.
McMinnville's Granary District is the
Okay.
closest.
All right.
You could take elements of this and in Bend, out of their mill district. Bend's is a much bigger scale.
Yeah, I've been there. I know what you mean. Yeah.
If you were down in Eugene in the 5th Street Market area,
Okay. Yeah.
is another location that's done something like this. If you were out off of Hollywood Boulevard in Portland, up in Northeast Portland, there's some mixture of some of these types of conversion of industrial buildings to mixed activities, residential and craft industrial.
Okay. I'm writing them down. I want to go see them. Yeah, I think it's a great idea, what you're doing here. You kept mentioning the uses you're going to keep in the C3 when you were running through the chart. Since this is such a small area, I would eliminate a lot of those that you talked about, because they're bigger and they don't belong here, and just focus on what your intention is. Like we don't need a college here or a church and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There's no reason to keep it there because it doesn't. Well, for one, it doesn't belong, and it's too small to even do that. The other question I had, once you do all this and take it into the M5, are you going to have a lot of non-conforming issues?
I think we have actually non-conforming issues over there now. We have some industrial property that requires a 20,000 square foot lot, and they're not on 20,000 square foot lots. So, yeah, we do have some of those over there now. The issue with the codes that I've seen throughout my career is that as much as you try to get everything to fit in that nice square peg area, it doesn't fit. So there's always issues created with these codes. And yeah, there might be some nonconformities. They would be allowed to remain as a legal nonconformity. We're not going to tell anybody that they have to change and conform to this. So they would be allowed to continue.
Yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah, it's interesting because you think if you look at the old Chehalem Mill, and some of the concepts by that owner is turned it into a glass museum, basically sitting vacant at this point in time. Anvil Academy sitting in the Quonset hut. When you look at the convenience store, the old Anvil site, you've got restaurants, you've got the wine laboratory and supplies, you've got the old classic car, which is converting into a marijuana dispensary. You've got a tire shop, you've got an auto detailer. So it's an eclectic mix of activities already.
Yep.
From a use perspective.
Yes. Okay, that's all I had.
Any other questions? I have a question. Of when looking at this and to facilitate them building something, or what's the interest level of people trying to take advantage of this? Do we have any sense of that?
So one of the activities I have is to try to attract a hotel into the downtown area. So one of the thoughts is, could you go where Ray's Produce is and the yoga store and the real estate broker, and there's a house, there's some older industrial buildings, there's some vacant lots along Hancock Street, there's the Chehalem Mill. So we've had some conversations with some developers about what could we put a hotel and anchor it at the corner, reintegrate Ray's Produce somehow as an outdoor market, indoor market into that, and possibly get some restaurant space over by the railroad track so that you got some different use activities. The parking demand is higher at night for the hotel, but then you'd have a parking field during the daytime for the restaurant and a museum activity and for the produce. So yes, we've had those kind of conversations. I've had people come and talk to me about the area from the classic car all the way up to Main Street between Hancock and First. And could that area be redeveloped into multiple different buildings and going vertical instead of basically these one stories? Possible to do. You know, you have to go talk with the property owners and see if they are interested in selling or not. So we've had those kind of inquiries happen since we adopted the downtown plan.
Okay, good. Anyone else have any questions? Okay, we'll be moving on then. Do we have anything else from Keith about this, or is that it?
Well, I can give you kind of an update. So on our schedule, and this may change, again, we want to try to get the property owners involved in this process. We haven't been very successful yet. We were looking at possibly on November 12th, bringing this back for you to review. That's our tentative date at this point, may get pushed out a little bit more. I do need to do some more work on the design guidelines and bring those back to you as well. So, but that's what we're looking at it as a tentative schedule at this point. We have to get the TPR analysis done. There's some other steps that need to take place.
Okay. Just looking over the notes you have here, as far as the parameters you're setting, they look pretty good to me. So, with the distances and all that sort of thing. So.
Okay, great.
Okay. Moving on to. Hold on, let me bring it up. Let's see if it's the end of the mill district issue. We're on to items from staff, which I believe is planning commission activities to start with.
Yes, Mr. Chair. So you have what we have on the agenda tonight for the 9th. Next month, we're looking at a conditional use, a quasi-judicial hearing for a vacation rental at 1213 East 9th, a quasi-judicial annexation for some property up off of Chehalem Drive. And then I'll give you an update on where we're at on the economic opportunities analysis, the work that will be reviewed by the Citizens Committee later this month. September, right now we're tentatively looking at vertical housing. Keith's bringing that to you, and then a subdivision. I will not be here on September 10th. To let you know, I will.
Oh dear.
I'm going to go out of the country of Oregon to go to a different country in the States. And that's all by vehicle, not in an airplane or a train. So Keith will be leading the meeting that night. In October, as we mentioned earlier, we'll have the hearings on the riverfront, and I'll give you another update on our economic opportunities analysis. As Keith mentioned, tentatively, the Mill District, I honestly think that's probably going to get pushed out to the first of the year as we work through the property owners and get the TPR stuff done. And then there'll be something that's called an infrastructure-based time extension request. This is a grant that we received from the state of Oregon DLCD, and we have to have that body of work done by December 31st. So we're looking to get something to you on November 12th. Our fallback is, if we're not ready to go, would be at your meeting in December. So we've got a lot of things. I mentioned we got these housing grants. We got 4 of them. And so I'm working on scope of works and consultant selection and so forth. As we move forward over the course of the next year plus, there will be a lot more briefings on things related to housing that will be coming before you. Be prepared for that. It's going to be the year of housing.
Exciting.
Housing, okay.
So that's what we've got going on there. The other thing then is on the urban renewal. So I'm not going to get into a lot of detail. I sent you 200 pages of material. Just kind of focus on the executive summary portion of that. So today I gave a presentation to the Kiwanis Club on the urban renewal program. We've been out to the farmers market distributing flyers. We've sent material to the Rotary, to City Club. Chamber's been pushing information out. So is the Downtown Coalition. Reached out to the Ministerial Association, and then we had some material that went out in your utility bills this month, which provided a link to our website where you can watch some videos that explains urban renewal. We had a Citizens Advisory Committee meeting on the 29th of June, where they reviewed the final executive summary and the final full plan or feasibility study. A lot of robust discussion. We made some tweaks and adjustments to the executive summary on some tables, which are represented in the version that I sent out to all of you. And that was directed to what's called direct impacts on taxing authorities versus indirect. And the indirect is on the school district and the education service district. And what we mean by indirect is that for the loss in property tax revenue, they get backfilled by the state through the school fund. It's not a one-to-one match, but it is a nominal impact upon the school district in the ESD. At the last committee meeting, we went back through the growth scenarios and what the maximum indebtedness amount can be. We talked about the fact that we do not have to select a growth scenario as part of the feasibility. That would come at a plan and report stage. We talked through the $117 to $118 million of projects that have been identified in that list, knowing that we can't afford to do it all. So there will be a selection process if the council accepts this feasibility study, and what I'll call the winnowing process to narrow that list. It could be some projects we fund fully, others we only do some proportional share, or there'll be projects that just don't make a final list at all. In the end, the ad hoc committee formulated a recommendation for the city council to accept the feasibility study and to direct staff to establish an urban renewal agency. So we will be going to the city council on July 20th, be at their work session where we will give them about a 45-minute presentation on the feasibility study and the details, and then we'll come back into the business session at 7 o'clock, and on their item will be a resolution to officially accept the feasibility study and to direct staff to establish an urban renewal agency. Most of the material that's in this packet tonight, I've already given you a briefing on. What's really occurred is some wordsmithing, a few adjustments on some tables, filling in all of the other engagement activities that we've been involved in and making sure that we captured all of that. That's all I have on that topic.
Okay, that's looking good then.
Moving forward. And that is all that staff has, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I think we're getting close then. Do we have any items from commissioners? Not hearing any, not seeing any little squares light up, so I'm going to go with nothing. I don't have anything.
Oh,
so unless there's,
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
I just want to let you know I'm very happy to be a planning commissioner.
Oh, well, we're glad to have you. The developer side is always a good perspective to have for making land use decisions, in my opinion. So that's good.
Robert, why don't you take a few minutes and just share a little bit about your background as the new commission member?
I started my career in 1973 after graduating from Washington State, and immediately went to work for a planning department up in Spokane. And I spent 6 or 7 years there, and then got tired of it and went to the private sector for another 6 or 7 years. So I've got a pretty good background on what it is that Keith does and Doug does and all that kind of stuff, and listening to what he's the things he's working on, it brings back memories of all the stuff I had to do when I was just out of college. After those two jobs, I went directly into the development business. And I spent my entire career since then in construction and development, acquisitions of properties, that kind of thing. So I'm very familiar with really everything there is to do with development, and this is nationwide. I've done stuff in I don't know how many cities, almost all major cities I've been to and done work there. So I'm very pleased to be here. We've lived in Newberg for 13 years. but I've never had time to get involved with the city because I was always traveling to do projects and wherever they were. So that's my background.
Very good. Okay.
Okay.
Well, that's certainly a good area for perspective. So for the rest of us and for planning to deal with. So if that's all, I think we'll adjourn the meeting for tonight. Thank you all for coming along and sharing your time. Good night.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.